Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. So for today's video, I want to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to be reading some of the comments that some of you have left on my different videos on this channel, especially the past, I think 5 or 6 videos that I've done in the past 2 or 3 months. I want to do this partially because, I do try to address the comments and talk to people in the comments, but I also want to start building a greater sense of community on this channel and a greater sense of we're all in this together, and that, the Just Gender channel is something that we all can be a part of, and it's not just me, and that I want to have a conversation with all of you. I'm really always just happy by how intelligent and smart the comments in my comment section are, and how people are willing to disagree with me. And sometimes they're very complimentary, sometimes they're bringing up interesting points that I hadn't thought of. I am honestly legitimately very happy that this channel has developed a group of people that are very intelligent and want to engage intelligently with the stuff that I'm talking about, and sometimes more intelligently than even I myself do. So yeah, I'm just going to be reading some of the comments from my phone, so I'm just doing this off the cuff. If I didn't pick yours, that's 100% nothing against you. I just sort of went through and just kind of picked ones that I knew I could talk a little bit about, and I wanted to pick so many more. There were so many comments that I wanted to talk about, but I had to pick a few, or else this video would be go on forever. Thank you for them. Keep them coming. I do try to read almost all of the comments that I get within reason, especially within the first few days of a video being released. If it's a few months or weeks later, I may not read the comments, but I do try and read all the comments after the first few days of a release. Alright, so this one was on my Joker and the ethics of releasing nuanced art video. Excellent video. This is a very interesting topic, one I often ponder over myself, and I thought you did a great job exploring the intricacies of these complex topics. And I too would side with valuing art and not blaming the artist. However, another interesting aspect of this that you didn't touch on in this video, which I don't blame you for because the video is very focused, if you went down too many other avenues it would become bloated, is the prospect that many blame art for atrocious acts, particularly mass shootings, as a way to deflect from the gun control issue. That is, those who oppose any kind of gun reform will often try to desperately reframe the issue of mass shootings as nothing to do with firearm laws, and thus will look for other scapegoats to blame for these mass shootings, and art is often their easy target. Be it violent video games, movies, music, TV shows, comic books, or whatever. And this too, I think, is a factor on why certain pieces of art, unjustly in my opinion, come under fire for negatively influencing violent acts. But then again, bringing up this topic would also bring up a whole other can of worms. Anyways, thanks for this video. It was really thought-provoking. So that was a bit of a long one. But I did want to address that specifically, sort of talking about the gun control issue and sort of deflecting it onto art. And that is something I fully agree with you, Eternity. Yeah, I don't have time to get into the entire gun control argument here. That's a whole other video in and of itself, but I did want to bring it up within this video because I do think that when it comes to people committing mass shootings and violence, these are people that were always going to do that. I don't think that movies in and of themselves are, inspiring people to commit violence. It may be the specific thing that they point to as their inspiration, but I don't think that people that were going to commit violent acts were going to do it based on a piece of art. They were going to do that regardless, and maybe there was just one piece of art that just crystallized it for them and they used that as sort of their excuse, but I think it was something they were going to do anyways. And I think the bigger issue is mental health, and I do think that we need to talk about mental health in the context of how we are sort of leaving these people in the gutter and not thinking about them. And sort of letting them stew in that, and that sort of leads them to these thoughts. But there's so many factors involved in that too, cutting funding, also politics, how certain politicians, not to name specific names, are sort of influencing people's thoughts on this and about who they choose to target when they do these mass shootings. There is there are certain targets of mass shootings that keep occurring. That doesn't just come out of nowhere. Hate speech and influencing people to hate others influences who they choose to target. So all that is a confluence. But then gun control on top of that is the fact that we give people access to guns so easily and make it so easy for guns to be readily available to these people is also a major part of the issue. These people would not be able to commit as much of their violent acts if they did not have such ready access to gun control. So it's such a mixture of all these things, and it's such a complicated thing to get into, but I at least wanted to make people aware that that is part of that conversation. When talking about the ethics of art and releasing art, that is definitely part of that conversation. So thank you, Eternity, for bringing that up. Another comment on that video, completely out of left field. Steel is a good movie. It's not at all about the story of John Henry Irons, but it is a good movie. I sat through Batman and Robin in a theater. George Clooney is smiling in every shot wherein he appears, no matter the mood. Arnold Schwarzenegger, playing his first villain since The Terminator, fired wobbly icicles at flash-frozen Gothamites while shouting 1,000 times about how you'll make the world a cold hell. Bane in a gorilla suit. Poison Ivy is made settlements with a sadistic and vindictive person of a different sexual orientation who specifically wants to torture her forever. I love the Smashing Pumpkins. See, I wanted to see how their music was utilized in the movie, but it isn't in the movie. They play it during the end credits. So I sat through that train wreck, aged 14, just so I could see the end credits. The song finally starts, and an usher comes along and tells me to clear the theater. Only weeks before, I'd nearly been swallowed up by the Atlantic Ocean, rescued by my cousin Johnny. I was grateful to be alive, but as I walked out of the cinema, the feeling that life had value just disappeared. Tom at the comic shop was going to want to talk to me about the movie. He definitely wanted to debate its aesthetic versus its marketability or something. I didn't go back and buy comics for months, and back issues are expensive. Steel is a good movie. I don't know what you got against Steel. I find it funny, and I hope you intended it to be somewhat funny in your comments, because you did kind of relate a sort of really harrowing story, and I'm glad you're okay after that experience. I personally love Batman and Robin. It is not a good movie. It is a terrible movie, but it is the terrible kind of movie that I personally enjoy. But I am able to say that having, many other Batman movies that I can choose from nowadays. I have the Nolan movies, I have, Adam West movies, I have Batman and Robin, I have the earlier Batman films. I have a plethora of Batman options to pick from. And that's part of why I can kind of forgive Batman and Robin a little bit more, because, when I saw it, I had the Nolan movies at the time, or they were coming out or somewhere in that vicinity. And so it's sort of like, I can sit back and appreciate this for what it is, and not have it be like, this was my one Batman chance right now, and I got this crap. It's sort of like something like, I feel like we'll be looking back on, kind of how we look at the Star Wars prequels nowadays. It's sort of like, they were not good when they came out. People were very upset when they came out. But looking back, we kind of have a greater appreciation for them, because now we have other Star Wars things to pick from. People have different varying options of Star Wars things and be like, as this was the only Star Wars thing that I had, I was upset by it. But the fact that I now have options means that I can appreciate these for what they are, and then be like, all right, these were flawed, and I can go and watch something else, but appreciate the kernels of things that are in here. Or just enjoy the prequels for whatever. I actually personally really love the prequels for a lot of reasons. So, that's kind of why I love Batman and Robin. It's bad, but in a really enjoyable, fun way. Like, every time I watch Batman and Robin, it just makes me smile. I think it's just so bad in such a funny, interesting way, and sometimes those movies are just as enjoyable to watch as, really great movies. They say it takes just as much work to make a bad movie as it takes to make a good movie. And I will say, if you say anything, Batman and Robin took a lot of work. There's a lot of artistic stuff in that movie. From the, Mr. Freeze suit to things like that. So, Steel is another so bad it's good movie. I appreciate it on sort of a ideological level, because it is one of the few, especially at that time, one of the few, if only, movies that featured a man of color in a starring role in a big superhero blockbuster movie, which was, super rare and awesome at the time. And I don't think we got any more until Blade or Catwoman, which Catwoman is its own can of worms. Can of tuna, as it were. But Steel, I don't think it's a good movie. There is some bad stuff in it, and I think it's a worse movie objectively than Batman and Robin. But I think it is still also a fun movie for how some of the creative choices in it are just so bad they're intriguing that someone could make it so bad. R.E. Starship Troopers, I don't know how effective a critique of fascism it is when it shows the fascist government as being successful in its goals per the movie. It seems like showing consequences in which the subject can't recover for their bad, unethical, irredeemable actions would be more effective at getting an anti-fascist message across. Starship Troopers is actually one of my favorite films of all time, but you're welcome to disagree with it. And I think it is a highly effective fascist message, because I think it's showing this is what that world would be like, and you can sort of see the really dark underpinnings of what that would mean, and how these characters are just not appreciating the horror of their actions. The film literally ends with them learning that the bugs are intelligent and have feelings, and then them all cheering with they're afraid, and they're everyone's yeah, they're afraid, and you're not supposed to feel good about that. But I understand, and I talk about it in that video, that it is highly misinterpretable. You can misinterpret that as a purely, that is a good thing, and the film is trying to say it's a good thing. It's walking a very fine line as satire. But I don't think that the film is trying to say that fascism is good, and I think that it gets that across in a way that is very funny and clever, but that is my interpretation of the film. and it is, again, one of my favorite films, but I totally understand if someone watches that and says that's a gross film because it kind of has this pro-fascist message, if that's what you get out of it. And I know that the director, I forget the name of the director at the time, but the director very clearly states that he was doing it as a satire of fascism. And again, art is interpretable. You can, think it did its job effectively, you can think it didn't, and that's kind of what's awesome about it. But personally for me, I thought it really worked. So, but for you, if it didn't, that's 100% cool. So another comment on my Joker video, I would argue that the issue with American History X goes far beyond the framing of Derek and the flashbacks. It's in the text itself. The film is awful at communicating its anti-racism message. Derek brings run-of-the-mill white supremacist rhetoric. Why are we taking in poor people from other countries before our own? It's been nearly 150 years since the slaves were freed, so why are all black people still at a disadvantage when white people thrived in their generation? These fairly easily debunked talking points are never challenged in the film beyond characters literally saying, it's bullshit. Daphne, the supposedly socially conscious sister, says this, as does Avery Brooks' character, a black professor no less, who adds in a nice bit of both sides when he says, I used to blame white people for my problems too, it was just because I was angry. Even if the audience member wasn't a full-blown Nazi, they could reasonably come away with thinking, obviously Derek went too far, but he's still making valid points and there isn't a decent rebuttal. The film does literally nothing to dissuade people from that point of view. It's only anti-racist if the audience member is already anti-racist. That is 100% a fantastic critique by Jung's Bodyguard. I debated including American History X, and I know there was a few people in the comments that had problems with me using American History X in that video, and I fully and completely understand that, especially just based off of this criticism and the criticism that I was aware of. And I was using American History X because it was such an extreme example to discuss what I want to talk about in the sort of the context of like film inspiring people to commit violence, and watch the video to sort of understand where I was going with that. And perhaps in the video I probably should have more directly critiqued American History X and talked about what this person said and sort of the dangers of that film not being a good enough rebuttal against against white supremacy. And I think that is 100% true. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, if I start going in the weeds on that, it sort of ruins the point I was trying to make about Joker and sort of a broader picture. But again, I probably could have done a better job in making that clear within the video, and I think that is a failing of the video. And like I said, there were people who criticized that decision, rightfully, and it's something that, I'm taking to heart. I will... it's something that I got to think about even more when making videos like that. I think I'm proud of the video. I like that video. I think it says what I wanted to say, but it probably could have stood to have a little bit more time talking about that. And how film often... What are the responsibilities of film to debunk the bad ideas that it has? And I think that goes to Joker as well. Joker brings up, and I talked about this, Joker brings up a lot of troubling stuff, and it doesn't really debunk them in a way that feels substantial. And I think Joker gets away with it a little bit more just because, its message is less directly about white supremacy or things like that, or like incel stuff, which is some of the comments that people had on Joker. So I think it gets away with it a little bit easier than white supremacy because it feels a little bit less about that, whereas American History X is very much about like debunking white supremacy, but then the film doesn't really debunk white supremacy, and that's sort of a failure on that film and a failure of me in addressing that film. So it kind of perpetuates itself in an interesting way. So yeah, I wanted to at least bring that up. It's something that is worth discussion, and I think, Jung's Bodyguard brings up really great, interesting points that I think are worth thinking about in the context of American History X and in the video that I made on it. So thank you very much for bringing that up. So this next comment is on my video I did on Star Trek books, which again, Star Trek books are some of my favorite things. I adore the Star Trek literary verse. I personally love the DS9 relaunch. My fave are A Stitch in Time and The Never-Ending Sacrifice. Both are Kardashian stories, but I love how they approach their culture. Also, four-sexed Andorians. This is something I didn't really talk about in that video because I was just sort of giving like 5 random ones and trying to just spread it out across a lot of Star Trek stuff. But the DS9 relaunch is actually one of my personal favorites as well. The sort of post Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the show, books that sort of continue the continuity after that. I personally think they're really, really strong. They add some really interesting characters, including a Jem'Hadar, who becomes a regular character on the Deep Space Nine, and I won't spoil too much about that character because it's interesting as, as how his character develops. And also Ensign Ro becomes the security chief of Deep Space Nine after the end of Deep Space Nine. So there's some really interesting places that the DS9 relaunch goes. And specifically, as you pointed out, the Stitch in Time is considered to be one of the best Star Trek novels ever written. And it was written by Andrew Robinson, a book that he actually kind of wrote as he was playing Garak. It was sort of like giving Garak's backstory, and it's sort of a letter that he writes to Bashir after, as he's on Cardassia, helping Cardassia rebuild, and it's sort of him giving his backstory. And this is backstory that Andrew Robinson sort of developed as he was playing Garak and sort of wrote down, and then sort of released as this book with a little bit of sprucing up. And it really shows. It's a really deep dive into that character that I think is really beautiful. And, for any, Bashir Garak shippers out there, you can kind of read it as like a sort of a love letter to Bashir in a way, because it is something that Bashir is reading as a character, and there's even a book after that book is released where it's mentioned that Bashir is reading that letter from Garak. And so I think that it's a really, really beautiful novel, and I think it's really well done. So if you read any Star Trek book and you're a fan of Deep Space Nine, A Stitch in Time, you can read it without knowing the rest of the relaunch timeline. Just know it just takes place after Deep Space Nine, and I think you'll find a lot of really cool stuff in that book. Also, something I wanted to quick mention, because I finished recording this entire video and realized I didn't respond to the four-sexed Andorians part of your comment, and I gotta say that's something that they never really talked about Andorians having four sexes canonically within Star Trek on the actual show, and I thought it was one of the most brilliant developments of the book series is to give the Andorians four sexes, and I personally love that. It's part of the reason why Andorians are some of my favorite aliens in all of Star Trek, probably right behind the Trill, which are another race known for interesting discussions of gender within the concept of their species, and maybe that says something about me. Maybe I'm a little bit obvious, but I personally really like that development for the Andorians that came out of the literary verse, and I think it leads to some interesting discussions about the Andorians within all the books that is brought up in, and also just whenever I think about that, it makes me think of like, what would a species really be like if they had four sexes? I mean, honestly, not to say that this is the reason that we have such a binary culture ideal in our society, but I do think that our society tends to be very binary focused. We see things as one or the other, not just in sex, but in arguments, in politics, in everything. We have sort of one or the other. Cats and dogs, literally just binary opposites, even though cats and dogs have way more in common than they do in opposite with each other. So I'm always curious about how would a society that had four sexes from the start have developed differently, and maybe think about the world differently, and view the world differently, and have different concepts of society and how they build their society. Do they see four sides to every argument instead of just two? It just always led me to really think deeply about that, and that was something that I was thought was really cool in the books, and something that I really hope that we at some point get a chance to see with live action Star Trek. Alright, so this one comes off of my Mirror Universe ranking video where I ranked all the episodes in the Mirror Universe of Star Trek. I speak as a dyed-in-the-wool Niner, but my biggest problem with DS9's approach to the Mirror Universe has always been that, due to the seriousness of the Dominion War plot, something the show was really committed to developing, the writers decided that, post-crossover, the Mirror Universe was somehow the venue to have knockabout fun and let the cast play dress up. That's actually totally legitimate, and someone else in the comments also talked about how they didn't really like the way that Deep Space Nine took things, that it sort of kind of erase the sort of mirror image part of it, that it was supposed to be an inversion of these characters and that they were just different characters, which I actually kind of liked. I kind of liked that, O'Brien in that universe wasn't just an evil O'Brien, that he had elements of our O'Brien and was just a slightly different take on him. And I personally found that interesting, kind of fitting with Deep Space Nine's sort of more nuanced look. It's not just this is good, this is bad, this is more nuanced, and there can be good and bad in both sides of things. And I personally really like that. But I could honestly understand someone looking at that and being like, this is not what the Mirror Universe was intended for. This sort of ruins what the Mirror Universe should be used as a tool to say. And then Discovery and Enterprise after that sort of brought it back to that, where it was oh, this is these characters as an evil, twisted version of them. And even Discovery's kind of making that nuance with Emperor Georgiou. So I get that argument. And with your argument specifically, with the fact that they sort of just use it as a swashbuckling fun, I get that too. Crossover did have a very deep theme in it. I think some of the next two, like the one where Sisko goes and meets his wife, and then his wife sort of kidnapping Jake in the next episode. I thought that those were actually used in very intriguing ways to sort of develop the characters more in ways that you couldn't have done without the Mirror Universe, especially considering Jennifer Sisko being in those episodes. But then the last two, like the Ferengi one and then the one where, the guy comes over to steal the orb. I think, those two were just sort of like having fun with the concept and not really developing it further, which was a bit disappointing. And that's why those two probably ranked the lowest on my list of Mirror Universe episodes. There was a storyline in that could have been developed further with the Klingon-Cardassian alliance in the Mirror Universe that just kind of got dropped and ignored. So that is kind of sad that they didn't finish or complete that, and maybe somewhere down the line we'll get a completion of that arc. But I think your criticisms are very valid. Another comment on my Mirror Universe video. I love that you said Dr. Culber's development after his death didn't justify him dying, because I felt so much. Being gay myself, I loved that Star Trek Discovery included the first openly gay couple, even if I'm not a huge fan of Discovery, and when Culber died, I felt so cheated. I was excited to see him come back in the last season, but I felt the same as you, that when he went through what wasn't necessarily justifying of his death in the first place. But that's also where I think Star Trek Discovery fails miserably. I don't think it spends as much time on character development as it does on plot, and going forward, I think character development should be the driving force of the show. Also, Kira, incredibly one of the best performances in Star Trek. I mean, I'm biased toward DS9 because it's my favorite of the Star Treks, but Nana Visitor's portrayal of Intendant Kira was so riveting to watch. Also, I was so happy to see Hoshi become Empress at the end of Enterprise. I always liked Hoshi, but she felt underutilized, and seeing her outwit her way to the top made me so happy, haha. Thank you, Michael Halsey, for that comment. On the Kira and Hoshi stuff, I 100% agree with you. I absolutely love Mirror Kira, and I love that Hoshi got to, an underutilized character, got to sort of be the Empress at the end. Great stuff. I want to focus on your Culber stuff. Yeah, I agree. I think Culber is a character that I really love, and I'm very glad that he is back, and I think they used him in... I would disagree that I think his development as a character after that moment, I'm going to be doing a video on this actually, like him dealing with PTSD of having died, I thought was well developed for his character. Like, I thought that was an interesting character development, an interesting way to take that if you had to bring him back and not just sort of gloss over it, but there was actual repercussions for bringing his character back in that way. That being said, I don't think that killing him was the right way to take his character. There is something to be said of, like, killing off a gay person after, just finally getting our first explicit gay characters in Star Trek, and having him be the man of color in that scenario too is, killing off the gay man of color feels a bit gross. It's not, again, it's justifiable in and of itself, but just in broader context, it is kind of hard to watch that scene. Especially just going back, it's hard for me knowing it's coming and to watch that and it feels wrong, and a wrong choice for Star Trek to have made that character decision. Bringing him back in a way that I found intriguing, and his character development was intriguing based off of what had happened to him. I don't think that it was worth doing that. That it was worth, people, queer people and people of color having to wait like a year and change to sort of see the payoffs of that. And having to deal with like this sort of unsettled feeling like Star Trek kind of betrayed them in a way, and that hurts. And so I'm glad that he's back, and I'm glad they're dealing with it in a way that and like I said, I disagree with you probably. I think that the way they handled it, I found interesting, and sort of the best way you could have handled it, in my opinion, but I don't think it necessarily justified them doing it. If they had done it, like they killed him and then brought them back like 2 or 3 episodes later and then done the PTSD story off of that, I would say that would be more with it, because that feels more intentional, and then we wouldn't have had to sit for like a year and a half with it, and sort of that sort of uncomfortability and feeling a betrayal of that character. So I think you could have justified it if you did something immediately with it and sort of commented on it. But the fact that they just sort of left it on the table and then sort of retroactively decided to bring him back in the next season because of the criticisms, I think didn't justify it. So this one comes from my Women in Star Trek video, and this is by David Reedy. A great video. I sat down to just watch 5 minutes intending to finish it later, but I ended up watching it straight through. I can always mow the lawn tomorrow. Please do more videos like this one. I expect the amount of research and planning you put in is enormous, but the result is top class, and if you're aiming to both entertain and inform your audience, you're spot on target. Thanks again, and best wishes. Thanks so much, David, for that. I'm including this one just because there were so many kind comments on that video, and that really warms my heart. That was something that probably is the video on this channel that I've spent the most amount of time and work and effort into making it what it was. And it shows that it's like an hour-long video, but it was just a lot of fun. It was a really big labor of love. It was something I've been thinking about for a long time that I'd wanted to do, and the fact that it has gotten so many people giving such wonderfully positive responses on it is honestly, it makes me so happy. So I'm just using David's as sort of an example, but there were so many people that left kind comments just like David's, and I can't thank you enough. That means a lot to me that what I was going for came across, and that people found it informative, found it entertaining, and sort of sparked an interesting discussion about how women were treated within Star Trek. And that being said, the video was not meant to be an end-all be-all. And I'll get this in further comments in a little bit, but there's stuff that I missed. Plenty of stuff that I missed about the treatment of women in that video. I mean, there's only so much. The franchise is 50 years old, and I did this hour-long thing. So there's a lot of I missed, and a lot I'll probably touch upon in future videos. So I'm just glad that it sparked this discussion, and thank you so much to all of you for leaving those kind comments. It really means a lot to me. This is from Jimmy Dunn. I love this video. I also love that someone finally pointed out Neelix's toxic masculinity and abusive treatment of Cass, as well as how she was essentially a child when they were together. Yes, 100% agree. I never liked the character of Neelix. He was there for comic relief, and unfortunately I think he was often annoying, and he was often just there in a way that just bothered me. There's a few episodes here and there that I think he was used well, but overall I just found him to be an annoying character through and through. Probably my least favorite main character in all of Star Trek. I'd have to think about that for a second, but I honestly probably put Neelix as my least favorite Star Trek character of a main cast out there. And that's nothing against Ethan Phillips. I like him as an actor. I've seen him in other things that I really love. Neelix was not a great character. And the toxic masculinity part of it and his treatment of Cass certainly did not help in any way, shape, or form. And go watch the video because I talk more about it there, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds on it. But yeah, no, Neelix, in my opinion, just a character that never worked. And, I'm just hope we never see him again, sadly. Or if they do see him again, that they do something interesting with him in a way that, understands the problems with that character. This is from Michael. When I think of Star Trek and misogyny, something that comes to mind that was not mentioned in this video is Ferengi culture and how they treat women. This is one of those things that I mentioned that I didn't touch upon in the video because I only had so much time and wanted to focus on specific things. And Ferengi culture, and I probably will do a whole video on Ferengi's treatment of women, but Ferengi culture's treatment of women is a bad thing in Star Trek in terms of how Ferengi treat women. But what I find different about Ferengi's treatment of women and versus what I was trying to talk about in that video is that the Ferengi's treatment of women is framed as a bad thing within Star Trek itself. There are no characters within Star Trek that look at the Ferengi's treatment of women saying, that's good, that is a fine thing. And actually characters actively challenge how the Ferengi view women and treat women. In fact, I think there's a feminist movement on Ferenginar later on in Deep Space Nine. That's a certain plot that comes up. And we could argue about how that was handled, whether it was handled well or not within that. But at the very least, it is something that Star Trek was aware of and was trying to address and use Ferengi's treatment of women to address feminist issues and treatment of women. And so I felt that fell a little bit outside of what I was trying to say with the video, which was what are some of the unintentional ways that you can interpret Star Trek that weren't necessarily intended, but you are definitely there. You can definitely watch the original series and read a lot of misogyny into that series. But I don't necessarily think it was the intention of the writers to be misogynistic. I don't think that some of the things that they wrote were we want to, treat Human Rand this way and have her looked down upon by Kirk and things like that. I don't think that was their intention, but you can get that from watching the show. Whereas Ferengi, we could argue about how well the show used Ferengi women to discuss feminist issues. That's a perfectly legitimate discussion. I probably will do a video on it. But it is at least something that is being discussed within the canon of the show. And I thought that fell outside a little bit of what I was trying to talk about specifically with that video. This is on my trans dating video from Breanna Michelle. I am also a trans woman, but unfortunately for me, I'm attracted only to cisgender women. Also, I don't think attraction has anything to do with phobia. So to say that if a person isn't attracted to a trans person, they're transphobic, I definitely don't agree with that in the video. Just because you don't want to sleep with someone doesn't mean you dislike those people. Jesse was putting too broad of definition on transphobia here. So this is something that I find super interesting and I kind of want to address, and I tried to get this across in the video, and I thank you for this comment. This is sometimes hard for people to parse out. You can be transphobic or homophobic without hating the people that you have those feelings towards. You can be homophobic without hating gay people. And the way I kind of put it is you can be I love gay people. Gay people are great, but if they hit on me, I'm going to feel uncomfortable, and I am not going to want them near me, and that just feels gross. You don't hate gay people if you say that. I'm sure you're perfectly fine with gay people existing conceptually, but you still have a fear of gay people to a degree. And it's hard to reconcile with that, because when we talk about being transphobic or homophobic or racist, we tend to, if we call someone that or say that this tendency that someone has is homophobic, transphobic, or racist or something like that, the person gets defensive. Like, I'm not racist, I'm not transphobic. It's easy to defend yourself and want to defend yourself from that criticism, because you're like, I like these people. But you have to realize that this is just a criticism of, a certain feeling or action that you're having, and not necessarily an indictment of you as a person. All I was trying to do with that, when I'm saying that, a person who doesn't want to date trans people because they are trans, you can have other issues, and it is okay to feel that way. I would never, ever, ever tell you that you are a bad person for not wanting to date trans people if it's just, as long as it's not coming out of a place of hate. But I would challenge you to ask yourself, why do you feel that way? Is it for a legitimate attraction reason? Like, I just don't find, a person who changes, from their initial gender to be attractive, or things like that. That is legitimate. But I feel like a lot of the time, the reason people feel that way is from the sort of cultural discussion around trans people, that trans people are deceitful, or, dating a trans woman would make you gay if you're a straight man, or things like that, and sort of having that internalized feeling of homophobia and transphobia inside yourself, and that sort of stops you from wanting to date a trans person. And again, that is not to say you are bad or a bad person for that. But I ask you to, if that is the case, just recognize that and just kind of think about that, and think about, where that is coming from, and what that feeling is generating and causing you to feel about another person. It's just sort of hard to discuss this, because when I call someone transphobic, I am not saying you are a bad person. I am saying that the action that you are taking, and I think we tend to put, like, this person is transphobic, this person is racist, this person is homophobic, just sort of put those hats on people and just saying, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe. And I would really more say that certain actions that people take are transphobic, that you can do a transphobic action. And that does not necessarily make you overall a transphobe, but that the action that you are making is transphobic. And I would ask you to I'd challenge you to think about why you are committing that action, and why you are thinking about that action, and why you feel that way about certain people. And again, I'm not asking you to change in terms of, wanting to date trans people. If you don't want to date trans people, that is your choice, and I would never tell someone how to express their attraction. But I would just challenge you to think about it. And that's really all that I was hoping to say with that video. This comment comes from Edwin Peng. Thank you for this great video. Asian American males, both straight and gay, suffer a similar sexual and dating discrimination. And that's something that is super interesting, and something I try to bring up a lot, is that, I talk about a lot of issues as it relates to queer and trans stuff, because I am a member of the queer community and I am a trans person as well. And so a lot of the stuff that I discuss is typically framed as queer and trans issues. But a lot of the stuff that queer and trans people face are also similar stigmas that other minority groups face. As Edwin says, Asian Americans face very similar dating stigmas as trans people do. That people don't want to date Asian Americans, because, again, cultural stigma around dating Asian people. An interesting overlap with the trans community. There are unique things to each community. I think people of color, especially Black people in America, have very distinct struggles that I do not face, because of just the culture of how we treat people of color and Black people in America. Stigma around that, and the racism around that, just institutionalized racism that I don't want to say is non-existent for queer people, but is definitely much more blatant and much harsher towards people of color, and, violence towards people of color. But that being said, there is a lot of overlap with a queer experience and me being a white person, so, I may be wrong on this, and I welcome pushback, but I think there's a lot of overlap with what a queer person faces and what a person of color faces, but I think they also have a lot of distinct differences. And I think it's worth discussing where they overlap and where they're different, and how, I, as someone who does face some stigma as a trans person, need to talk about that, but then how I can be an ally to people of color and recognize that there are certain things that I do not face that I should sit back and listen and want to hear what people of color have to say about their experience, and so that I can learn and try to learn how to be a good ally for a person of color, because I don't face those things. And it's also very clear when it gets even more overlap when you're a trans woman of color who probably face the most violence and harm in our country. There's an epidemic of trans women of color being murdered, and that's part of the reason that they face the most violence, is because they have a lot of intersections of stigma and face a lot of hate from a lot of different places. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'll leave that, because that is a discussion that warrants its own entire video. But I at least wanted to draw attention to it here, and I thank you, Edwin, for bringing up that different communities face similar struggles in similar ways. This comment comes on my Spock and mental health video from Captain West Star Wind. Another great video. I'm glad I found your channel, and will probably end up binge watching a bunch of your videos today. My only real gripe with how they handled this issue was that in the 2009 movie, it was already established that Spock did not have any kind of learning problems. His struggle was dealing with his emotions. It seems as if Alex Kurtzman forgot what he had wrote in 2009, as we clearly see Spock solving complex problems with no major difficulties. Something like this may have been better suited for another character story arc instead of saddling Spock with more things to overcome. His core struggle was always handling his two halves, and how he viewed both humans and especially the stuffy Vulcans. While he does manage to save the galaxy and the Federation countless times, so that lot can go chew on that one. Anyhow, great video. Keep up the great work you are doing. Peace and long life. So, interesting point. There is an easy, quick answer to that, where it's just like, well, Star Trek 2009 takes place in another universe, and so you can kind of gloss over that and be like, oh, maybe he didn't face the same struggles that he did. I would actually say, a lot of things with people with neurodivergency, and, especially Asperger's, which is something that I have, is that when we're in school and solving complex problems, you can actually do that fairly easily. I actually was, not to, aggrandize myself, but I was a valedictorian of my school. And that's because my Asperger's exhibited itself in such a way that it made me really want to focus on school. Like, I became obsessive about my schoolwork and getting good grades. And that was a benefit to me, but, there was also detrimental in other areas, like social skills. So to say that Spock doesn't fit neurodivergency in the 2009 movie, I would disagree. I think it could still work within that framework. That, you see him as a kid, he's able to complexly solve problems, but then gets bullied by these kids. He clearly doesn't fit in with the other Vulcans. Now, part of that's probably just their bias towards half-human Vulcans, but it might also be part of the fact that, he's not good at being social as part of, his learning disability. He's just not able to handle social situations as well as other Vulcans. And so that is part of why he is picked on. I mean, you clearly see it in that video. He lashes out and hits the other Vulcan children in that, and that's common. Like, I did that as a kid in my school. When I was feeling overwhelmed, when I was bullied, when I didn't know what to do, I would sometimes lash out and hit things. I actually got suspended once because I punched a door in anger. Because I just didn't know how to control my own emotions very well. And so that's something that actually identified a lot with Spock, that he doesn't have a good handle on it. He doesn't know how to deal with them in certain situations. And so now just, talking it out here, I would actually say that 2009 Spock actually fits great within a view of neurodivergency and Asperger's, even though it's not made explicit in that film. And I think it perfectly fits within that reading. So I would disagree with you, but again, perfectly legitimate way to interpret that. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but in terms of my experience as someone who is neurodivergent, I can look at that scene and see a lot of myself in that. This one's from Mike P. So well stated. I came here to see what you had to say on disco because I was convinced that disco is crap, but as I always will eventually challenge myself to understand an opposing viewpoint in order to continue to learn something new, I found your wonderful essay. I am glad I did, and thank you for the work you did. Remember, folks, you already know what you think. Go and find what others that disagree with you think so you may learn something new. I am glad, again, that I did. You very well stated the ethos of Trek and what the writers of the show got right. Thank you so much, Mike, for that comment. That's what I really want to say. Like I've said numerous times, I do not think Discovery is a perfect show. There are a lot of problems, but I think there are also a lot of problems with every Star Trek show. I think every Star Trek show fails in a lot of ways, and I think it's worth saying, where they succeeded, where they didn't succeed, and having that discussion. And like I've always said, you can hate Discovery, you can love Discovery, and that is perfectly okay. And so I'm so glad that, my channel can be a place where someone who dislikes Discovery can come and feel like they can get something new out of it. Just like I try to listen to people who hate Discovery and hear what they have to say. There are certain things that I think people use to criticize Discovery that I don't think are worthwhile criticisms, like, talking about forced diversity and SJW agenda and stuff like that. And, you know, that's, again, its own whole topic. But, you know, if you have legitimate criticisms against the show, like you think that the way it's written does not speak to you, or isn't well developed, or, you know, certain characters aren't well handled, or you don't think it stands up to the ethos of Star Trek in a way that is, you know, fits with your standards for what a Star Trek show should be, all 100% legitimately reasonable things, and I'm so excited to be part of that discussion and to have a place where it can enable that discussion to happen. I want people to dislike and like Discovery and just discuss it on my channel and in my comments, and I hope that my videos are good catalysts for that. And I will never say that Discovery is perfect. I personally like it, and I find that there's a lot there that I think that resonates with me, but it is far from a perfect show, and I love being part of the discussion around that. So thank you, Mike, for you know, challenging yourself to hear differing points of view, as, you know, I try to do myself. You know, sometimes I succeed at that, sometimes I fail at that, but I always try to challenge myself to see things from every point of view and then come to my own conclusions on it from there. You know, I tend to have conclusions that tend to lean certain ways, like in Discovery or in politics, I lean a certain way, but I at least try to understand what the other point of view is saying. Because even then, it helps you better inform your own arguments. If you don't listen to what other people have to say about the opposite of what you're talking about, it's like, then you're never really challenging yourself, and you're not going to make your own arguments better because you don't know how to address it. You don't know what the weak points are of what you're thinking. It's like, that's an interesting point that they're bringing up there, and I can should look at that and be like, maybe I can use that to improve my own argument or my own side of things, or be like, oh, maybe that is a legitimate criticism. Maybe that is something that I can say, like, yeah, that's a problem, and we need to fix it. So yeah, I'm just glad that that's the discussion that we're having. All right, and last comment from Zorky Corky, which I love your name, Zorky Corky. I keep on going, your name is gender, it keeps on surprising me. So I just wish to say, as my last comment, my name is not Jesse Gender. It is the name of my channel, and I go by Jesse Gender often just because I find it to be a fun, catchy name that people remember easily. I do have a different last name than Gender. My first name is Jesse, and I do have a different last name than Gender, and it's out there on several of my videos. I won't state it here. I do it also partially just to maintain some semblance of anonymity, just like a small barrier of protection against, you know, trolls. You know, being a trans person on the internet means I do get trolled. I do get people saying some really terrible things to me. And you know what? Usually I can just brush that off. I don't really care. It's not a big deal to me. It's like, people are going to say what they're going to say. You know, being trans on the internet is just going to invite that, regardless of what you're actually talking about. So I use gender as like a small barrier. If someone really took, you know, even 5 minutes to try and find my last name, they can easily find it. It's not really that hard. I say it in my videos numerous times. I have articles that I posted on the internet that say my last name. But, you know, if someone's just going to be a troll, then they have to at least work a little bit harder for it to find that information. And so it just creates like a small barrier just to protect myself. And also, like I said, I think Jesse Gender is a catchy name. So yeah, that's it. All right, thank you everyone for leaving all those wonderful, beautiful comments. I really love this discussion. Like I said numerous times, I love that this discussion, that the discussions in my comments are from people who often disagree with me. I love that people are engaged with the work that I make. That really inspires me and makes me feel glad that I'm making work that is provoking thought. And I encourage all of you to continue leaving wonderful comments, to agree with me or disagree with me. Just as always, as long as you're being respectful, then I highly encourage that. I highly encourage criticism. I highly encourage disagreements and arguments and debates and discussions. I think that that's super cool. So thank you for all of you for leaving those comments. Sorry if I didn't get to read one of yours, but like I said, I do try and read as many as I possibly can. Leave your comments and let me know if you on this video, and let me know what you thought about some of the stuff that I said. If you liked this format, let me know, because I might do more of these comment videos. But regardless, if you liked this video and want to see more of my other videos, give my channel a subscribe. If you want to help make these videos even better, give to my Patreon page, because that helps pay the bills and helps me keep doing videos like this, and that really means a lot to me. And special thanks to my Admiral level Patreons, Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, and Lol. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how thankful I am for everything you guys have given. It really means the world to me. But regardless of if you subscribe or go to my Patreon page, I just have to say, until next time, live long and prosper.